what you need to know about FDA's pre-market requirements for medical devices. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of FDA's regulation of medical devices, how medical devices are classified, the regulatory requirements for each device class, the different paths to market, a short few slides on when clinical studies are required for medical devices, and then some information on user fees for medical device activities. This slide here shows the full regulatory definition of a medical device. I have bolded the information that is what I think really important to understand what a device is. It's something that is intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, and which does not achieve its primary intended purposes through chemical action within or on the body of man or other animals, and which is not dependent upon being metabolized. So in other words, it's something that's used to cure, mitigate, treat, prevent, or diagnose disease that's not a drug or a biologic. It's the easiest way to think of it. The first major piece of medical device regulation was part of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, which prohibited the adulteration and misbranding of medical devices, meaning that they had to be manufactured under GMP and that its labeling had to be truthful and accurate, but it did not clearly define what a medical device was, and it did not include a mechanism for how to put medical devices on the market for FDA's review or approval of medical devices. That framework did not come into place until the Medical Device Amendments of 1976, where you see all of these things being established. Finally, a medical device was defined. The process of pre-market notification, or 510K, and pre-market approval, or PMA, were defined. Devices already on the market, or pre-amendment devices, were recognized under this regulation. This is where we get device classification being established, good manufacturing practices, medical device reporting, which is adverse events for medical devices, and investigational device exemptions. These medical device amendments were the result of a U.S. Senate finding that faulty medical devices had caused over 10,000 injuries, including 731 deaths. There was other information put forth by FDA that there were fraudulent and quackery type medical devices on the market, so devices weren't safe and effective. And so these medical device amendments applied safety and effectiveness safeguards to medical devices for the first time. Since the medical device amendments in 1976, there have been a series of other laws passed that added to the framework that we now have today. For instance, the Safe Medical Devices Act in 1990 is the legislation that required a letter from the FDA before you could begin marketing a 510K device. And this is where the requirement for summaries of safety and effectiveness, or statements of safety and effectiveness, were required as part of a 510K submission. Clarified the substantial equivalence criteria, established user reporting requirements. This is where also what the term used then was pre-production QA was added to device GMPs, as well as describing how FDA was going to regulate combination products. Then there were the medical device amendments in 1992 that had to do mostly with tracking for certain devices and revising the definition of certain adverse device events that must be reported. The next major piece of legislation was not a law, but it was the Quality System Regulations in 1996, promulgated under FDA's authority to define good manufacturing practices for medical devices. It essentially harmonized the medical device GMP with what were then the ISO 9001 and ISO 1345 standards in effect at that point in time. Remember, I said in the previous slide, the Safe Medical Device Amendments added pre-production quality assurance to GMPs. The term used in a quality system regulation is design controls, which is essentially the same thing. It's how you design, develop, test, and manufacture a device. Design controls became effective in June 1998, with everything else under the quality system regulation effective in June 1997. Then there have been a series of FDA modernization acts. The first one was in 1997 that had a lot of changes to the 510K requirements, where you get things called abbreviated and special 510Ks. It put into the regulatory language criteria for exempting Class 1 and Class 2 devices from 510K, clarified the general and specific intended use concepts, expanded the scope of third-party reviews of submission, and fully codified the standards recognition process, as well as describing what FDA means by least burden